Hi, this is Larry Stewart with ForConstructionPros.com. Meet Ryan Whisner, who's editor of Green Industry Pros and our magazine in the green industry and the lawn and landscaping industry. We're talking today a little bit about how companies are going to get back to business in this COVID-19 era that we're dealing with, and implementing the social distancing requirements on project sites and on the kinds of sites that Ryan's readers end up on is, presenting a pretty significant challenge, and we're seeing a lot of different responses to that. Just recently, I had a chance to work on a piece about Shawmut Construction up in Minnesota, and their development of some software and combining it with some protocols to keep track of the safety of their employees. Ryan, what kinds of things are you seeing in your industry?
Well, one of the primary issues, particularly with the social distancing, is in regards to just getting from site to site. The landscape contractors mostly have pickup trucks or those sorts of vehicles to go from site to site as they're pulling a trailer with the mowers and such. And with the limitations of social distancing, for the most part, even in a pickup truck with a back seat, you're not going to be able to fit two people in there that are legitimately 6 feet apart. So a lot of the contractors are having to have only one person per truck. And so maybe only one actual work truck is going to the site, and the other crew members might have to take their personal vehicles to go from site to site. So then they end up having to pay for the gas then on top of, they're already paying for gas for the truck, but it would be only one vehicle versus four.
Right.
So they're having to compensate them at least some amount for the gas. So
what about
that's one of the biggest challenges.
I'm sorry. What about distancing when they're at work? I mean, is that usually fairly easy for landscaping crews?
So far from what I've heard from the contractors out there, it hasn't been too bad because in the early stages of this, they were the hardest thing was, first of all, for the green industry was determining whether or not they were going to be labeled as essential or not on the front end. Because as the safe at home orders came down across the states, it was in March. So not many states were really thinking about landscaping and such. That was kind of low on the list of what are we labeling certain businesses essential or not. So a lot of the associations the NALP really had to step up and say, hey, state governments, federal government, landscaping is essential. So once that was determined, then it was a matter of, okay, do we open up our shops? Do we keep the offices open, or let those people stay at home and only open up the shops as needed and have maybe one person in there to do repairs on this, that, or the other? So for the most part, coming onto their where their things are kept, depending on how big of an operation they are, hasn't been too bad because they set up staggered shifts usually to get people in and out. And then, like I said, they're sending only one person out in a truck, or they're taking personal vehicles out to their sites. And then once they're on site to do a job, to mow a lawn or trim or whatever, they're for the most part able to keep pretty well separated. I mean, they're not usually, there's not a lot of two-man things that they really have needed to do. Some of the spring cleanup operations are two-man, but they may be having to blow leaves to a curb and then use a vacuum to suck it up and to put it into the truck. Sometimes that can be a two-man operation, but for the most part, operating that vacuum, one person can be doing that and the other person's driving the truck, so they're still 6 feet apart. So it hasn't been too bad from that perspective.
Yeah, a little more of a challenge in construction. There's been a lot of scheduling changes, a lot of staggered shifting and that sort of thing, but they're inevitably in construction. They're multi-person jobs, things that need to be lifted into place and that sort of thing. And the practices that I'm seeing contractors adopt is, special personal protective equipment protocols associated with it. Everybody's wearing masks and face shields in some circumstances. gloves and implementation on construction sites being relatively stationary. You know, a proliferation of hand sanitizing stations around the construction site. So there's opportunities to clean up when you're working, closely with each other. And, there's just a sort of a multiplicity of other little things, shared tools becoming more and more of an issue, trying to reduce the inventory of shared tools as much as possible and implementing protocols for cleaning the ones that inevitably are going to be shared anyway, powered equipment and that sort of thing, things that you're not everybody they can't afford to have, one of each for everybody who might use them.
Yeah, if you don't mind me interrupting here, on the landscape side, they are kind of trying to do that too, and the methodology there is they try and again, it depends on how large of an operation. For a larger operation, they may just say, okay, this is that crew's equipment, that's their trimmer, their mower, their whatever, and so that's on that trailer. Only those 4 people touch those things. Yeah. So they'll still try and clean them off, but at least they're limiting it to those 4 people, 3 or 4 people. So they try and do that. Now, what's been, I think, more challenging is you go down smaller to the guy he's got his pickup at a trailer and it's him and maybe one other person. So it's, maybe a 2 or 3 person operation. Well, then you've got a bigger problem, because then you already do have that limitation of the tools, and you're all touching them at various points of the day, because one guy's doing the mowing and then he hops off and grabs the trimmer, but the other guy was using the trimmer at the other site and didn't clean it off. And it becomes challenging. I mean, I think that's where it's been more painful for those smaller contractors, because they don't necessarily have the ability to invest in the hand sanitizer and have the protective equipment. I mean, some of it's already there, depending on what kind of jobs they're doing. They may already have some sorts of masks to use, but and certainly for the most part, they're going to be using gloves of some kind. But you get down to some of that nitty gritty stuff where it's the hand sanitizer and the cleaning and the cleaners to just wipe off the equipment. That's not something they were necessarily always doing.
Yeah, it's, really does become kind of eye-opening, particularly on the construction side, where, I know there's a site in Kansas City that I can think of specifically, and I'm sure they're not the only one, where there has been a rash of infections on those sites, and the construction industry is far enough down the road into this now that companies are talking about, well, what's my risk exposure here? Because if somebody comes down with the virus and they can figure out a way to track it back to their construction site, then there's real liability associated with it. And so construction firms are trying to implement policies where they're checking people's health as they're coming onto sites. We've heard about temperature checking and that sort of thing. I think that's a real challenge. That's it's essentially a medical procedure. Making sure that gets handled properly, really is challenging. But like this Shawmut, they had created some software where employees come in, scan a QR code, get a little survey. I assume they're doing this every day, and answer a few questions. I think that they didn't go into the specifics of what the questions were, but said that if an employee had been in contact with somebody who was infected, in the last 24 hours or whatever, in the last whatever time, they say yes to that question, assuming that's what one of the questions is, that their safety people are able to step in and find out more information about that without, they obviously must have a protocol in place for privacy of the individual.
Sure.
But they're really balancing this, privacy and risk situation. And a big company like Shawmut recognizes they've got a lot of exposure, and so they've got an investment in getting deeper into this thing and understanding each other. In fact, they had also implemented, and I'd seen this from a couple of construction companies, software associated with the video instrumentation that they're using on some of their big project sites. Smart Video is the name of one of the makers, that actually it allows them to measure distances between people and figure out, make sure that people are 6 feet apart. I assume there's an AI engine associated with that
Right.
flags exceptions rather than having somebody watching all that video. I know there's another technology. I know the wearable technology company Triax has announced a mod, I think, on one of their existing technologies that can generate an alert when it's closer than 6 feet from another one of their technologies. So they're actually electronically monitoring distances between people. I don't know how significant that's going to be, but again, if you've got people doing work on site and somebody gets sick, being able to prove that you did everything you possibly could to make sure that your workers is safe is sort of essential. And I think the thing that really matters with the Shawmut experience, the one thing that got my attention at least, was that they developed all their protocols along with the unions that they're working with. And so it's,
Sure.
The unions have run this through, their lens and, and said, hey, yeah, this is, we need this. So whatever they might have given up in terms of privacy, I guess not given up is the wrong way, but they're thinking about they're thinking about privacy, accommodated
Sure.
these protocols.
On the construction side, what have you seen in terms of? I'm just thinking on a construction site. Usually, there's going to be a trailer where there is somewhere so you're looking at the plans and making sure you're building the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, are they, for the most part, with that on that end? Is that just a matter of not more than 2 people, or even less than that, are necessarily in that trailer at any given time?
Yeah, they all have protocols for social distancing and
Yeah.
they're encouraging as many people to work from distance as possible, and
Sure.
in a lot of sort of the high end commercial construction where building information modeling is being used, so much of that plan data and all that sort of thing is available electronically that
Sure.
you can access them from a remote location or from out on the project site using a tablet or something like that. And so there's a real advantage right now to companies who are in that position. If we do get to the point, and heaven forbid that somebody gets sick and has serious health issues as a result of that on a project site, and the cost of just simply operating a construction site goes crazy because of some big legal challenge to a contractor.
Sure.
These people that are working with cloud software to manage their projects electronically are going to have a significant advantage in just being able to operate, just being able to field crews and and demonstrate the commitment to safety that really has changed in this environment.
The landscapers have been using a lot of the same type of software just to keep their business running smoothly and keep track of everything, because they didn't have to, literally, if they do have an office per se, they didn't have to literally pick up the computers and walk out with them. Is they just locked up the office and, hey, gee, they can access everything they need right at home. Or even if they're more of a their owner and operator, they have it right there on their tablet going, okay, this is my next customer. They don't have to call in and check in with somebody, because they can look it up themselves pretty easily. So yeah, there's a couple of companies that have software that helps them out with those things.
And luckily the construction industry is fairly decentralized already, operates that way a good bit of the time, already. It's just, managing the million and two details, protocols for cleaning portable sanitation facilities, and managing any place where people eat lunch, or there's risks with food trucks that tend to serve the food needs for these companies. And it surely is it's a different world. It's and an evolving one. We're really just on the front edge of this thing. It seems like we've got enough experience now that it seems like to be dangerous, but really understanding more and more what our options are for keeping people safe. There's a lot of those in place, and now I think the real threshold is establishing just how much risk there is.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest question for everybody, for these contractors, is what does it look like going into the future? I mean, what really is the new normal?
Right.
I mean, for landscapers, as they adjust to the social distancing and that part of it, one of the things at first that they were also dealing with was just the idea that because everybody was safer at home, not that they don't need to be cognizant, oh, people are watching us, mow the lawn or mow the properties and take care of the properties. But in this particular, now, these past couple of months, they really were home and they really were watching a little bit more closely. Hey, what are you doing on my property?
Yeah, right. Yeah, they had to step up the customer service skills, I'm guessing.
Exactly. But at the same time, even though knowing the customer was home, they couldn't engage in person with them still.
Right.
Because that wasn't a safe thing to do. So it's like, okay, so we can't go up and knock on the door if we have a question, but if they maybe come to the door and just say, hey, what are you doing over there? We can talk to them, but it's got to be from afar.
Yeah,
it's been kind of interesting.
Do something silly to get their attention.
Right. Exactly.
Well, Ryan, thanks so much for your time. It's an interesting conversation. Everybody's going to be keeping a close eye on this. We will definitely be working within our own spheres. Ryan on greenindustrypros.com and myself on forconstructionpros.com. And I hope you folks out there will have a chance to tune in. If there's any questions that we can answer, let us know. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Larry.